Ambassador Thesic of the Cathari had seen many strange things in his 60 years of life, but nothing had disturbed him quite like the sight before him now. A human child sitting perfectly still beside a medical pod, her small hand pressed against the cold glass, her eyes fixed on the blinking monitors that showed her mother's fading heartbeat. The colony of Vera 7 was supposed to be a place of hope and cooperation between species. Humans and Cathari working together on a frontier world, far from the wars and troubles of the inner systems. But 3 days ago, pirates had attacked the settlement and Chief Engineer Mei Chun had taken a plasma bolt to her chest while sealing the reactor doors that saved 200 lives. Now she lay in a cryopod, balanced somewhere between life and death. And her 7-year-old daughter Lily had not moved from her side in 6 horse. Thesic stood at the observation window with Commander Elena Vasquez, the human leader of the colony's security forces. She was a tall woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. He respected her greatly, which made this moment all the more painful. "How long has the child been like this?" he asked, his voice carrying the deep rumble that all Cathari voices possessed. Elena checked her wrist display and said, 6 hours and 14 minutes since she sat down. She has not eaten, has not spoken, has not cried. Thesic felt his twin hearts clench with sorrow. Among his people, the young ones expressed grief through loud wailing and violent movement. They would tear at their own scales. They would scream until their throats went raw. They would throw themselves against walls and floors until exhaustion claimed them. It was brutal to watch, but it was healthy. It was natural. It was how the poison of grief left the body. But the silent ones, the rare children who went still and quiet when tragedy struck, those were the ones who never recovered. Their minds would break like glass dropped on stone. They would stop eating, stop drinking, stop responding to the world around them. Within days, sometimes hours, they would simply fade away. Thesic had seen it happen twice in his lifetime, and the memory still haunted him. He turned to Elena and spoke with great care, not wanting to cause her more pain, but knowing he must warn her of what he saw. "Commander, I must tell you something about your species that my scholars have studied extensively. We have read your psychological texts. We have observed your behavior patterns. We have built models to understand how human minds work under stress." Elena raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "The cub has not moved," Thesic said, his voice heavy with grief he could not hide. "Your kind calls it the silence before death. When a human youngling ceases to vocalize, ceases to move, ceases to react to the world around them, they have begun dying inside. The mind shuts down to escape pain it cannot process." "I am sorry, Commander. I believe you will lose both of them." He expected tears. He expected anger. He expected the human to break down the way his own people would when faced with such terrible news. Instead, Elena simply looked through the window at the small girl sitting so still beside her mother's pod. Her expression was unreadable, neither grief, nor hope, nor despair. It was something Thesic could not name. "That is not what is happening, Ambassador," she said quietly. Thesic blinked his large amber eyes in confusion. "I do not understand. The child shows every sign of what you think you understand about us." Elena interrupted, her voice still calm but carrying an edge now. "Your scholars read our books and watched our behavior and built their models. But Ambassador, have you ever actually asked a human what our silence means?" Before Thesic could respond, she turned and walked away down the corridor, leaving him alone at the window with nothing but questions and a growing sense that he had made a terrible mistake. He looked back at the child. Lily Chun sat in the same position she had held for hours, her small body perfectly still except for the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. Her eyes never left the monitors. Her hand never left the glass in the dim light of the medical bay. She looked like a statue carved from pale stone. Thesic pressed his clawed hand against the window and whispered a prayer to the old gods of his homeworld, asking them to guide this small human soul wherever it might be going. A Cathari nurse named Velith approached him from behind and spoke in their native tongue so the nearby humans would not understand. Ambassador, the others are asking about the human child. They wish to know if they should begin the morning preparations. Thesic closed his eyes and nodded slowly. Yes, tell them to gather in the eastern chamber. We will perform the rites of passing at sunset. It is the least we can do for the child and her mother. Velith hesitated before asking, Ambassador, are you certain the child is dying? She looks. I know what she looks like, Thesic said, more sharply than he intended. She looks like she is fighting. She looks like she is holding on. But I have seen this before, Velith. The body holds on long after the mind has let go. It is a cruel trick of nature. The nurse bowed her head and left to deliver his. Mesigethesic remained at the window as the hours passed. He watched human doctors and nurses move in and out of the medical bay, checking on Mei Chun, adjusting the cryopod settings, trying to stabilize her failing organs. None of them seemed concerned about the child in the corner, which only confirmed his fears. They had already accepted what he saw. They were simply waiting for the inevitable, but something strange happened as the 6th hour turned into the 7th and then the 8th day. Human nurse, a young man with kind eyes, brought Lily a glass of water and a small plate of food. The child did not take her hand from the glass or her eyes from the monitors, but Thesic saw her lips move. She was speaking to the nurse. He could not hear what she said through the thick window, but the nurse nodded and set the food and water beside her before walking away. Lily did not eat. She did not drink. But she had spoken. Thesic felt a tiny spark of something that might have been hope, but he crushed it quickly. False hope was crueler than no hope at all. He turned away from the window and went to join his people in preparing the morning rites. Certain that by morning, the human child would be gone. He was wrong, but it would take him much longer to understand just how wrong he truly was. Among the Cathari, there was an old saying that had been passed down through countless generations. The crying child will live to see tomorrow. But the silent child has already said goodbye. Thesic had learned this saying from his grandmother when he was barely old enough to understand its meaning. She had told him the story of her younger brother, a bright and joyful child who had watched their mother die in a mining accident. The boy had not screamed or wailed or torn at his scales like the others. He had simply gone quiet, sitting in the corner of their dwelling with empty eyes that saw nothing. 3 days later, he was gone too. His body had simply stopped working, as if his heart had decided there was no reason to keep beating. This memory weighed heavily on Thesic as he sat in the eastern chamber with his fellow Cathari, preparing the sacred oils and ceremonial cloths used in the rites of passing. Around him, soft voices murmured prayers for the human child they believed was already lost. It is a tragedy, said Elder Morith. His scales faded to pale gray with age. The humans are strange creatures, but their young do not deserve such suffering. Perhaps it is a mercy that she will join her mother soon. Thesic wanted to agree, wanted to find comfort in the idea that Lily Chun would soon be free from pain. But something nagged at him. A small voice in the back of his mind that whispered doubts he could not silence. Thought about Commander Elena's words. Have you ever actually asked a human what our silence means? What did it mean? What could it possibly mean other than what his scholars had determined through years of careful study? He had read the human text himself. He knew about their psychological conditions, catatonia, dissociation, traumatic shutdown. He had seen the case studies of human children who had witnessed terrible things and simply stopped responding to the world. The medical literature was clear. Prolonged silence and stillness in human young was a sign of severe psychological damage. often irreversible, and yet Elena had looked at that child with something in her eyes that was not grief. It had almost looked like, no, surely not. It had almost looked like pride. The thought troubled him so deeply that he excused himself from the preparations and made his way back to the medical bay. He needed to see the child again, needed to understand what he was missing. When he arrived at the observation window, he found that he was not alone. A small crowd of Kethari had gathered in the corridor, their voices hushed and their eyes sad as they watched the human girl through the glass. Some of them had brought small offerings, flowers from the colony's garden, smooth stones from the river, tiny figurines carved from wood. Gifts for the dying, tokens of respect, and Sarathesic pushed through the crowd until he reached the front. And what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Lily Chun had moved not much. She was still sitting in the same chair beside her mother's pod, but her position had shifted slightly. Her free hand now held a data tablet, and her eyes moved back and forth between the tablet screen and the monitors. Displaying her mother's vital signs, she was reading something. She was comparing data. What is she doing? Desik asked aloud, not expecting an answer, but one came anyway, from a human nurse who had just exited the medical bay. She asked for her mother's engineering logs. Said she wanted to understand how the cryopod works. Desik stared at the nurse in disbelief. She wants to understand the technology? At a time like this? The nurse shrugged in that strange human way that conveyed so many emotions at once. Kids cope in different ways, Ambassador. Some cry, some get angry, some try to learn everything they can about what is happening to the people they love. It gives them a sense of control when everything else feels out of control. The nurse walked away before Desik could ask more questions. Leaving him more confused than ever, he watched Lily for another hour. And in that time, she did not look up from her reading once. Her finger traced lines of text on the tablet, pausing occasionally to check the monitors, then returning to the screen. Her lips moved silently as she read, forming words in a language Desik could not understand. The Kethari Dr. Yuroth appeared at his side, his face twisted with concern. Ambassador, this cannot continue. The child has not eaten in 12 hours, has not slept in who knows how long. Her body will fail, even if her mind does not. We must intervene. Commander Elena has forbidden anyone from disturbing her, Desik replied, though the words felt hollow. Yuroth made a sound of frustration. With respect, Ambassador, the commander is not a medical professional. She does not understand what prolonged stress does to developing bodies. Human children are even more fragile than our own in some ways. Their bones break easier, their organs are less redundant. I know, Desik interrupted. I know all of this. But what would you have us do? Drag her away from her mother by force? Would that not cause more trauma? It might save her life, Yuroth insisted. Please, Ambassador, speak to the commander again. Make her understand that we are trying to help. Desik agreed. Though he had little hope that Elena would change her mind, he found the commander in the security center, reviewing sensor logs from the pirate attack. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, betraying the sleep she had sacrificed to keep the colony safe. Ambassador, she said without looking up from her screens. I assume you are here about Lily. The child needs food and rest, Desik said, trying to keep his voice calm and reasonable. My doctors fear for her physical health, even if, he paused, choosing his words carefully, even if her mental state is not as dire as we initially believed. Elena finally looked at him, and her expression was hard to read. Your doctors think she is dying inside. Is that not correct? They are concerned, Desik admitted. And what do you think, Ambassador? The question caught him off guard. No one had asked for his personal opinion. He had simply accepted the scholarly consensus as truth, I think, he said slowly. That I do not understand humans as well as I believed I did. Elena's expression softened just slightly. That is the most honest thing you have said to me since this began. Come with me." She led him back to the observation window, where the crowd of mourning Kethari had grown even larger. Elena ignored them and pressed her hand against the glass. "Watching the small girl who sat so still inside when I was 8 years old," Elena said quietly. "My father was diagnosed with a terminal illness. The doctors gave him 6 months to live. Do you know what I did?" Desik shook his head. "I went to the library every day after school and read everything I could find about his disease. I learned words that 8-year-olds should not know. I memorized treatment, protocols and survival statistics and experimental therapies that had not yet been approved." She turned to face him. "My teachers thought I was in denial. My relatives thought I was avoiding my grief. The school counselor recommended therapy for my unhealthy coping mechanisms. What happened?" Desik asked. Elena smiled, but it was a sad smile. "My father died anyway. All my reading did not save him. But Ambassador, here is what matters. I was not dying inside. I was not giving up. I was fighting the only way I knew how. I was gathering information, looking for any chance, any possibility, any tiny thread of hope that I could pull." She looked back at Lily. "That child is not shutting down. She's doing exactly what I did. She's doing what humans do when we love someone and cannot accept losing them. She's looking for a way to save her mother." Desik felt something shift inside him. A crack forming in the wall of certainty he had built around his understanding of humanity. "And if she fails?" he asked softly. Elena's jaw tightened. "Then she will grieve. Then she will cry and scream and rage. But she will not do any of those things until he knows that there is nothing more to be done. Until then, Ambassador, that little girl will fight with everything she has." She turned and walked away, leaving Desik alone with his doubts and a growing suspicion that everything he thought he knew about humans was wrong. 18 hours had passed since Lily Chun had taken her seat beside her mother's cryopod, and the colony of Vera 7 had split into 2 camps, those who believed the child was dying and those who were not so sure. The Kethari remained convinced that tragedy was approaching. They continued their mourning preparations, lighting ceremonial candles in the eastern chamber and singing the old songs of passing that their ancestors had sung for thousands of years. Their voices echoed through the corridors like the crying of distant birds, beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. The humans, meanwhile, went about their duties with a strange calmness that the Kethari found deeply unsettling. They checked on Lily periodically, bringing food and water that she did not touch, speaking words of encouragement that she did not seem to hear. But none of them tried to move her. None of them panicked. None of them wept. It was as if they knew something the Kethari did not. Ambassador Desik had spent the night pacing in his quarters, unable to sleep, unable to quiet the storm of questions in his mind. Commander Elena's words had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. What if his scholars were wrong? What if everything they believed about human psychology was based on incomplete information, misinterpreted data, flawed assumptions? But no, surely not. The Kethari were known throughout the galaxy for their careful scientific methods. They did not make mistakes like that. They had spent decades studying humanity, observing their behavior, cataloging their responses to stress and trauma. The models were solid. The conclusions were sound, were they not? When morning came, Desik made his decision. He could not stand by and watch this child die without at least trying to reach her. He would speak to Lily directly, would offer her the comfort and support that she clearly needed, would try to break through the shell of silence that surrounded her. He walked to the medical bay with heavy steps, past the crowds of his own people who parted before him with bowed heads, past the human guards who watched him with unreadable expressions, but did not try to stop him. The door to the medical bay opened with a soft hiss, and Desik stepped inside. Room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft hum of the cryopod's cooling systems. The air was cold, much colder than Cathari preferred, and Desic felt his scales tighten against the chill. Lily sat exactly where she had been for 18 hours. Her small body curled in the chair like a cat seeking warmth. The data tablet rested on her lap, its screen still glowing with engineering diagrams and technical specifications. Her eyes were fixed on the monitors, showing her mother's vital signs, watching every beat of her heart. Every breath her damaged lungs managed to talk. Desic approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. He lowered himself to his knees so that his large eyes were level with hers, a gesture of respect and equality among his people. "Little one," he said gently, "may I speak with you?" For a long moment, Lily did not respond. She did not move, did not blink, did not acknowledge his presence in any way. Desic felt his heart sink. Perhaps it was already too late. Perhaps the child truly had retreated so far into herself that she could no longer hear the outside world. But then her eyes shifted, just slightly, moving from the monitors to his face. And what Desic saw in those eyes made him take a sharp breath. They were not empty. They were not broken. They were burning with an intensity that seemed far too large for such a small person. Those eyes held fire and steel and something else, something that looked almost like fury. "You came to tell me that I am dying," Lily said, her voice hoarse from hours of silence but steady nonetheless. "You came to say that I should let go. That I should cry and scream and give up like you want me to." Desic opened his mouth to protest, but Lily continued before he could speak. "I heard the other aliens talking outside the window. I do not know all your words, but I understood enough. You think I am broken. You think my brain has stopped working because I am not making noise. Child, I only want to help," Desic began. "Then help me understand this," Lily interrupted, holding up the data tablet. "Look at this number here. The coolant flow rate in Sector 7 of the cryopod. It should be constant, but 3 hours ago, it dropped by 0.03%. And then 2 hours ago, it dropped by another 0.02%. And then 1 hour ago, I do not understand what you are saying," Desic admitted. Genuinely confused, Lily's jaw tightened in a way that reminded Desic startlingly of Commander Elena. "There is something wrong with my mom's pod. The doctors have not noticed because the changes are so small, but I have been watching all night and I can see the pattern. Something is failing, something inside the machine, and if we do not fix it," She stopped, and for the first time, Desic saw something crack in her composure. Moisture gathered at the corners of her eyes, threatening to spill down her cheeks. But she blinked hard and forced it back, forcing herself to stay focused, to stay in control. "I am not dying inside," Lily said, her voice fierce despite its smallness. "I am not giving up. My mom told me that when things get really bad, you get quiet. You stop wasting energy on panic. You watch. You think. You wait for the moment when you can do something that matters." Desic stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. This was not a child in catatonic shock. This was not a mind shutting down to escape unbearable pain. This was something else entirely, something he had no framework to understand. The moment for what? He asked softly. Lily looked back at the monitors, at the numbers that only she had been watching closely enough to see. The moment to save her. And that was when the alarms began to scream. The cryopod's warning lights flashed red, filling the room with crimson shadows. The monitors exploded with error messages and critical alerts. The steady beeping that had marked Mei Chun's heartbeat turned into a chaotic jumble of sounds that meant only one thing: she was crashing. Doctors and nurses flooded into the room, pushing past Desic, shouting orders and grabbing equipment. Urith was among them, his scales pale with stress as he read the diagnostic data streaming across his screens. "Coolant system failure," he announced, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The primary pump is cracked. We are losing cryostability. If we cannot... Sector 7, Lily said, her small voice somehow cutting through the chaos. The crack is in Sector 7? I saw the fluctuations 3 hours ago. Urath turned to stare at her. What did you say? The crack is in Sector 7, Lily repeated, standing up from her chair for the first time in 18 hours. And I know how to fix it because my mom wrote about this exact problem in her maintenance logs. There is a bypass. She began reciting numbers and procedures, her voice clear and steady despite the alarms screaming around her. She spoke of valve sequences and pressure adjustments and emergency protocols that she had memorized during her long night of reading. Thesic watched in amazement as the doctors scrambled to follow her instructions. Ura's hands flew across the control panel, entering commands that a 7-year-old human girl was dictating from memory, and slowly, impossibly, the alarms began to quiet. The warning lights faded from red to yellow to green. The chaotic beeping smoothed back into a steady rhythm. Mei Chen's vital signs stabilized, hovering in the safe zone where life could still be preserved when it was over. Lily Chen sat back down in her chair, placed her hand against the glass of her mother's pod, and finally allowed the tears she had been holding back to fall. But they were not tears of despair. They were tears of relief, of exhaustion, of a battle hard fought and narrowly won. Thesic knelt beside her once more, and this time, when he spoke, his voice trembled with an emotion he could not name. You saved her, he whispered. You sat here for 18 hours, and you watched, and you learned, and you saved her. Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked at him with those burning eyes that would haunt his dreams for years to come. I told you, she said simply. I was not giving up. I was just being quiet. Word of what had happened in the medical bay spread through the colony of Varath 7 like wildfire through dry grass. Within an hour, every human and every Cathari knew the story. How a 7-year-old girl had sat in silence for 18 hours, had taught herself the workings of an advanced cryopod system, had noticed the flaw that trained doctors had missed, and had saved her mother's life with knowledge she should not have possessed. The Cathari who had been preparing morning rites found themselves standing in shocked silence, their ceremonial candles still burning in the eastern chamber, but now seeming foolish and premature. They had been so certain, so absolutely convinced that the human child was dying, that they had not even considered another possibility. Ambassador Thesic remained in the medical bay long after the crisis had passed, watching as the human doctors ran additional tests on the cryopod to ensure it would not fail again. Lily had finally agreed to eat something, a small sandwich that a nurse had brought her, and she chewed mechanically, while keeping her eyes fixed on the monitors that showed her mother's steady heartbeat. She had not left the room. She had not celebrated or cheered or shown any sign of triumph. She had simply returned to her vigil, though now her body language had changed slightly. Her shoulders were less tense, her breathing was slower, and occasionally, very occasionally, she would close her eyes for a few seconds before snapping them open again. She needs sleep, Urath said, approaching Thesic with a datapad clutched in his clawed hands. Her body is running on fumes. If she does not rest soon, she will collapse. I do not think she will leave until she knows her mother is truly safe. Thesic replied. Urath made a sound that might have been frustration or admiration or both. The pod is stable now. Her mother's condition is improving. We have identified and repaired the microfracture in the coolant system. There is nothing more for the child to do. Then tell her that. Urath's scales flushed with embarrassment. I tried. She asked me 14 follow-up questions about our repair methods and wanted to see the diagnostic reports to verify our work. Ambassador, this child knows more about cryopod engineering than some of my junior medical staff. Thesic could not help but let out a small laugh, a rare sound for his species. She spent 18 hours studying. That is apparently how humans grieve. It is not grief, Iris said, his voice thoughtful. Or perhaps it is a kind of grief we have never encountered before. A grief that refuses to accept defeat. A grief that turns despair into determination. They watched in silence as Lily finished her sandwich and brushed the crumbs from her lap. A human nurse came to check on her, speaking in soft tones that Desek could not hear from his position across the room. The nurse gestured toward a cot that had been set up in the corner of the medical bay, an invitation to rest without leaving her mother's side. Lily shook her head at first, but the nurse said something else, and gradually the child's resistance seemed to fade. She looked at the monitors one more time, checked the numbers, and then slowly, reluctantly made her way to the cot and lay down within minutes. She was asleep. Desek let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Finally. Perhaps now she can begin to heal properly. But even as he said the words, he knew they were not quite right. Lily Chun did not need to heal because she had not been broken. She had been fighting a battle that no one else could see, using weapons that no one else understood, and she had one commander. Elena appeared at his side. Her arrival so quiet that Desek had not heard her approach. "My guards told me what happened," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that he had not heard from her before. "They said you were there when the alarms went off. They said you saw what she did." "I saw everything," Desek confirmed. "I saw a child recite engineering procedures from memory while doctors scrambled to keep up. I saw her stay calm when everyone around her was panicking. I saw her," he paused, searching for the right words. "I saw her be more human than I ever understood humans could be." Elena nodded slowly. "I owe you an apology, Ambassador." Desek blinked in surprise. "An apology? For what?" "For not explaining better," Elena said. "For letting your people believe things that were not true. I was so busy dealing with the aftermath of the pirate attack that I did not take the time to help you understand what you were seeing when you looked at Lily. I assumed you would figure it out on your own, and that was not fair. My scholars should have known," Desek said, the words bitter on his tongue. "We have studied your species for decades. We thought we understood human psychology. We thought we knew what your silence meant. You knew what the book said," Elena replied gently. "But Ambassador, there is a difference between studying a species from the outside and understanding them from within. Your scholars read about catatonia and dissociation and trauma responses. They built models based on clinical data and case studies. But they missed something important. What did they miss?" Elena turned to look at the sleeping child, and her expression softened in a way that made her look younger than her years. "They missed the stubbornness. They missed the refusal to quit. They missed the part of humans that looks at an impossible situation and says, 'No, I will not accept this. I will find another way.'" She turned back to Desek. "When a Cathari child goes silent in the face of tragedy, it means they have given up. But when a human child goes silent, it often means exactly the opposite. It means they have stopped wasting energy on emotions they cannot afford and have started focusing everything they have on solving the problem. But surely not all human children respond this way," Desek said, genuinely curious now. "Surely some do break down, do give up, do enter the kind of shutdown state our scholars describe." "Of course," Elena agreed. "Humans are not all the same. Some of us do shatter when faced with overwhelming loss. But, Ambassador, here is what your scholars missed. Even the ones who shatter often put themselves back together again. Even the ones who fall apart often find a way to rebuild. Your people see our broken ones and assume they are destroyed forever, but that is not how humans work. We break and we heal, and we come back different, but not diminished." Desek absorbed her words in silence, feeling the foundations of his understanding crack and shift beneath him. Everything he had believed about humans, Everything his culture had taught him about this strange and frightening species, it was not wrong exactly, but it was incomplete. It was like trying to understand an ocean by studying a single drop of water. Ambassador, Elena said, her voice taking on a more formal tone. I would like to request something of you. Name it. When Lily's mother recovers, and she will recover. Thanks to her daughter, I would like you to speak to your people. I would like you to tell them what you saw here. Not because I want to embarrass you scholars or prove your models wrong, but because I want our species to truly understand each other. Misunderstandings like this one could lead to tragedies in the future. And I do not want any more children, human or Cathari, to be written off as lost. When they are actually fighting their hardest, Desik considered her request carefully. It would not be easy. His people valued their scholarly traditions, their carefully constructed models of the universe. Admitting that they had fundamentally misunderstood an entire species would be humbling at best and humiliating at worst, but he thought of Lily Chun, sitting alone in that chair for 18 hours while aliens gathered outside her window to mourn her death. He thought of how close they had come to interfering, to dragging her away from her mother's side, to breaking her concentration at the exact moment when she was doing the most important work of her young life. I will do more than speak to them, Desik said. I will write a formal amendment to our scholarly records. I will ensure that every Cathari who studies humanity knows about this day and what it taught us. And I will, he paused, looking at the sleeping child. I will make sure that Lily Chun's name is remembered, not as a victim of tragedy, but as a teacher who showed an arrogant old ambassador how much he still had to learn. Elena smiled, a real smile, not the polite diplomatic expression she usually wore. Thank you, Ambassador. I think that is exactly what she would want. As if hearing her name in her sleep, Lily stirred slightly on the cot, her small hand reaching out toward the empty air as if searching for something. Then she settled again, her breathing deep and even, finally allowing herself the rest she had denied herself for so long, and Desik stood guard over her. This small human who had changed everything he thought he knew, and wondered what other lessons humanity had yet to teach him. 3 days after the night that changed everything, Mei-chan opened her eyes for the first time since the pirate attack. The doctors had slowly brought her out of cryosleep as her body healed, monitoring every heartbeat and breath with the careful attention of people who had nearly lost her twice. When her eyes finally fluttered open and focused on the world around her, the first thing she saw was her daughter's face. Lily had not left the medical bay except to shower and change clothes. She had slept on the cot in the corner, eaten her meals beside her mother's pod, and continued studying engineering manuals as if preparing for an exam that might come at any moment. The human staff had stopped trying to convince her to take breaks, and the Cathare had stopped gathering at the observation window to watch her with sorrowful eyes. Now she sat beside her mother's bed, a real bed, not a cryopod, holding her hand and crying freely for the first time since the whole ordeal began. Hey, baby girl, May said, her voice weak but warm. What did I miss? Lily laughed through her tears and launched into an explanation of everything that had happened. The cryopod failure, the microfracture she had detected, the bypass procedure she had directed, the look on the alien doctor's face when he realized a 7-year-old knew more about his equipment than he did. She talked for 20 minutes without stopping, the words pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. May listened with wide eyes that grew wider with each new detail. When Lily finally finished, she pulled her daughter close and held her tight, tears streaming down her own cheeks. I am so proud of you, she whispered. I am so incredibly proud of you. Ambassador Desik watched this reunion from a respectful distance, standing with Commander Elena outside the medical bay. He had requested permission to observe, wanting to see the conclusion of the story that had begun with his terrible misunderstanding. The child truly did save her, he said quietly. The doctors confirmed it. Without her intervention, the pod would have failed completely within 2 hours. Mei-chan would have died. Elena nodded. Lily has been a bit of a celebrity around the colony. The engineering team wants to offer her an apprenticeship when she is old enough. They say she has a natural talent for systems analysis. She has a natural talent for surviving, Thesic corrected, and for refusing to let the people she loves die. That is a very human talent. I am learning. They watched as May and Lily talked and laughed and cried together. Their bond strengthened rather than broken by the ordeal they had endured. Other humans came to visit friends, colleagues, neighbors, each one congratulating the little girl who had become an unlikely hero later that day. Thesic fulfilled his promise to Commander Elena. He gathered the Cathari residents of Vareth 7 in the Eastern Chamber, the same room where they had prepared their premature morning rites, and addressed them formally. "My people," he began, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom, "we have made a grave error. Not an error of malice or carelessness, but an error of understanding. We looked at a human child in crisis and saw what we expected to see, what our scholars told us we would see. We saw stillness and silence and assumed it meant surrender. We saw a lack of tears and assumed it meant a broken mind." He paused, letting his words sink in. Around him, dozens of amber eyes watched with rapt attention. We were wrong. Not wrong about all humans, for they are as diverse as we are, but wrong about what human silence can mean. When a Cathari goes silent in grief, it is because the fire inside them has been extinguished. But when a human goes silent, he thought of Lily's burning eyes, of the fury and determination he had seen in that small face. It can mean that the fire has been concentrated, compressed, focused into a point so hot and bright that it burns through obstacles we thought were impossible to overcome. Elder Morith raised a clawed hand. "Ambassador, are you saying we should change our scholarly models? That decades of research were mistaken?" "I am saying that we should add to them," Thesic replied. "Our research was not wrong, but it was incomplete. We studied human behavior without truly understanding human hearts. We cataloged their reactions without grasping their motivations. We built models of their psychology without accounting for their stubborn, frustrating, magnificent refusal to accept defeat." He told them the full story of Lily Chun, her 18 hours of silence, her careful study, her detection of a flaw that trained professionals had missed, her calm direction of the repair procedures that saved her mother's life. And as he spoke, he watched his people's expressions change from doubt to wonder to something that looked almost like respect. "The humans have a phrase," Thesic concluded. "They call it the eye of the storm, the calm center of a great tempest, the still point around which chaos rages. I used to think this was merely a weather phenomenon. Now I understand that it is a description of how humans face catastrophe. They become the eye of their own storm. They find stillness not because they have given up, but because they need perfect focus to fight." After the gathering, Thesic made his way to the medical bay one final time. He had requested permission to speak with Lily directly, and both her mother and Commander Elena had agreed. He found the child sitting beside her mother's bed, reading aloud from a book of human fairy tales. May was awake and listening, a peaceful smile on her face that showed no sign of the trauma her body had endured. When Thesic entered, Lily looked up and actually smiled at him, a small smile, but genuine. "Ambassador," she said. "Mom said you wanted to talk to me." Thesic lowered himself to his knees so that he was at eye level with her, just as he had done during those dark hours when he thought she was dying. "I wanted to thank you, Lily. And I wanted to apologize." "Apologize for what?" the child asked, genuinely confused. "For underestimating you. For assuming I knew what you were experiencing when I understood nothing. For almost convincing others to interfere when you needed to be left alone to do what you needed to do." Lily considered this for a moment, her young face serious. The other aliens were singing outside the window. I heard them. They thought I was dying, did they not? Yes, Desic admitted, feeling shame color his scales. They were singing morning songs for you. That is actually kind of nice, Lily said, surprising him. I mean, they were wrong about what was happening, but they cared enough to be sad. That is more than a lot of people would do for someone they do not even know. Desic felt something warm bloom in his chest, admiration for this small human, who could find kindness even in a misunderstanding that could have cost her everything. May I ask you something, Lily? He said. Sure. During those 18 hours, when you were sitting alone and studying and watching the monitors, were you not afraid? Lily's expression grew thoughtful. She looked at her mother, who gave her an encouraging nod, and then back at Desic. I was really scared, she admitted quietly. I was so scared that I wanted to scream and cry and break things. I wanted someone to tell me everything would be okay. I wanted to be a little kid who did not have to understand what was happening. But you did not do any of those things, Desic observed. No, Lily agreed. Because my mom always told me something important. She said that fear is just your brain telling you to pay attention. It is not telling you to panic or give up or run away. It is telling you that something matters, that you need to focus, that you cannot afford to be careless. She reached out and took her mother's hand. So I paid attention. I paid attention harder than I have ever paid attention to anything in my whole life. And I am glad I did. Desic rose to his feet, feeling the weight of years pressing down on his old bones, but also feeling something lighter, a new understanding that would stay with him for the rest of his days. Thank you, Lily, he said. You have taught an old ambassador a very valuable lesson. What lesson? She asked. Curious Lithus smiled a Kethera's smile, which looked strange to human eyes, but carried the same warmth as any human grin. You taught me that when a human goes quiet, the galaxy should pay very close attention, because the silence before death is not always about the death of the one who is silent. He paused at the door and looked back at this remarkable child. This tiny human who had fought an impossible battle with nothing but her mind and her will and her stubborn refusal to surrender. Sometimes, he said softly, the silence before death is a warning to death itself. And then he left, carrying with him a new understanding of humanity that he would spend the rest of his life sharing with anyone who would listen. That humans were not dangerous because of their weapons or their numbers or their technology. They were dangerous because of something much simpler and much more frightening. They were dangerous because they did not know how to quit, and that, Desic understood now, was the most human thing of all.